Hi, I'm Steve Hebrock. I want to talk about one of the things in the horse world that's driven the engineer in me absolutely crazy for the last 20-some years. One of the more common things we hear from both barefoot and shod horse owners revolves around this idea of support. In the case of the barefoot horse owner, he or she will often say that his or her horse needs to have longer heel buttresses, or what we simply call heels, for support. And with horses that wear shoes, owners will remark that the horse needs shoes for support or extra support. Now, I know this is something veterinarians and farriers believe to be true, but I want to explain why in both cases this idea is absolutely without any scientific merit whatsoever. Let's start with a more straightforward one first. The idea that longer heels translates to increased support for the horse. To begin, I'll ask you to consider a very reasonable parallel that you can probably relate to much better than your horse's feet. Suppose you're sitting on a stool, it doesn't matter, any sort of stool, and someone comes along and saws, say, 2 inches off all the legs. Now, is your weight suddenly less supported than it was a few minutes ago? Of course not, because support isn't related to how high or how long something is, period. Support, or more technically correct, support force, is a physical quantity that's directly related to surface area. So when we're talking about a horse, we can correctly say that the horse is being held up or supported, meaning it's not sinking into the ground, by the upward force exerted by the ground on the bottom of the horse's feet, which is equal and opposite to the downward force on the ground exerted by the horse. This, by the way, is basic physics that you may have learned in high school. Studies have shown, for example, Dr. Brian Hampson did some interesting studies on Brumby feet while he was at the University of Queensland in Australia, that on an even, unyielding surface like concrete, the frog and the bottom of the hoof wall are the only parts of the barefoot horse's foot in contact with the ground. And as the substrate gets softer, more and more of the sole comes into contact with the ground as well, which is only logical. So in the worst case, so to speak, the horse is being supported by the frog and bottom of the hoof wall. That's the minimum amount of support for the horse, because it's the smallest amount of foot area in contact with the ground. Now, the best case, the most support, would be in terrain that would mold completely to the bottom of the foot as the foot comes under load, because it would provide the most surface area of the foot in contact with the ground, spreading the horse's weight over the largest possible area. When a typical horseshoe is placed on the bottom of the foot, only the bottom of the hoof wall is in contact with the shoe. Thus, support is actually reduced over the situation where the horse is barefoot, because frog contact has been eliminated. And less contact means less support, by definition. Since the shoe has raised the hoof off the ground, the possibility of other parts of the hoof bottom coming into contact with the ground has now been reduced as well on all but the softest substrates. So the only way a horseshoe could ever increase support over a bare foot would be by filling the space between the bottom of the hoof wall and the sole and frog with some sort of fairly rigid material, which would cause a number of other problems for the horse. What a horseshoe can and does do, however, and it doesn't matter whether or not it's nailed on or glued on, is restrict the ability of the hoof to expand as the foot comes under load, which is a big part of the foot's role as a shock absorber. So if by support someone really means make the foot stiffer, then a shoe can definitely do that. But it's not or shouldn't be desirable to short-circuit the foot's ability to mitigate the forces of impact and loading. The foot's role is very important to the health and comfort of the horse, and minimizing or eliminating one of its key functions is not without short and long-term soundness consequences. Horseshoes, of course, can also interfere with the horse's natural foot placement and adversely affect their quality of movement. But that's really a large enough subject for an entire other talk, so we'll leave it there for now. I should also point out, though, that a horse's heels, like the rest of the hoof, are designed to be quite short. And if they're left longer than they're supposed to be, two things happen. First, it causes an improper hoof landing, which can create both short and long-term soundness problems. And second, because the hoof grows forward as well as down, the extent of which is dependent on the conformation of the horse, the footprint of the horse, his base of support, is moving away from where it's supposed to be as the hoof gets longer. That increases strain on the flexor tendons and the suspensory apparatus. This is also why frequent, proper hoof trims are so important. By design, the hoof is meant to be in a constant state of wear, thus maintaining that short, optimal hoof length that causes minimal strain on soft tissues and allows every horse to move his best. Waiting too long between trims, especially for horses that live in drier environments on harder terrain but experience very little movement, only adds to the likelihood of soft tissue injuries. I suspect where the whole support misunderstanding really comes from is that people don't realize that the horse is standing on the shoe. And it doesn't matter how big the shoe is, nor does it matter that the shoe is fastened to the horse's foot. He's still standing on the shoe, and the contact area, and thus the support, has been reduced, not increased. Think about it in people terms. Imagine cutting away the bottom of your shoes to leave only an outer rim for you to stand on. Do you honestly think you're better supported than when the entire bottom of your foot is in contact with your shoe? No, definitely not. Now imagine extending that rim shoe out away from your foot so you're essentially standing on a big piece of leather, rubber, plastic with a hole in it just a bit smaller than your foot. Do you feel better supported now because the part of the shoe not under your foot got bigger? Nope. Or let's go the other direction. Imagine balancing on a marble under each bare foot. Do you think anything changes for you, whether there's a 2-foot by 2-foot piece of plywood under the marble or an entire 4-foot by 8-foot sheet of plywood under the marble? And does it change anything whether or not the marble is glued to your foot, the board, or both? Support doesn't work that way with you or anything else, including your horse. A shoe cannot ever increase support, period. Keep that in mind the next time someone tries to tell you that her horse has to have longer heels for support, or that he's adding support to his horse with some sort of special horseshoe. These are the kind of topics Dora and I very much enjoy exploring and teaching about. Consider joining us at one of our Enlightened Equine Hoof Care for Horse Owners workshops for lots of lively discussion on a wide variety of hoof and hoof-related topics. Thanks a lot.